The action research study that I conducted was called Blogging Benefits in an Elementary Classroom. It was conducted in a sixth grade classroom, my classroom. I had two research questions for my project. The first was to evaluate the extent online posting will have on sixth grade students' writing conventions. And the second one looked more at the motivation. So to what extent will online posting of writing affect sixth grade students' motivation to write? My intervention I used was my students were required to write their reading journals using blogger.com versus a notebook. And at the beginning of the year, I set up expectations. They had to be 15 sentences long. We brainstormed ideas of sentence starters. The students' writing had to be more reflective and show their metacognitive thinking versus a summary of the book. I had 18 sixth grade students in my study that participated. We are a one-to-one classroom with MacBook Airs. 50% of my classroom are girls and 50% of boys, so 9 and 9. 67% of the students in my classroom are free and reduced lunch students. I have one tag student, 2 students that receive Title I math support, and I have 2 IEP students. They're both math IEP students. For my data collection, I created a survey to assess my motivation questions. So I created a survey / questionnaire. There were some open response questions. And the survey was conducted with a Likert scale from 1 to 5, 1 being strongly disagree, and 5 being strongly agree, and 3 being neutral. There were survey questions that asked students about their motivation to write and also about whether they felt they write better on their blogs when they post online versus writing on paper. I used a checklist based off of McGrail and Davis. Used a checklist in their study that I found in my literature review. So I used a checklist similar to theirs for mine, and I evaluated and analyzed a written blog post and also an online blog post of a reading journal. And the checklist had things on it like vocabulary, questioning, reflection, punctuation, those basic conventions that I was looking for to see if online posting had an impact on whether they used those or not. And then I also used observation notes for my motivation question as far as asking students to write on paper versus writing on their blog, and I recorded their responses, not necessarily in a questionnaire, but what they said to each other, what I was observing them saying and doing when I'd ask them to complete that. My findings for my action research project was, I've shown 2 tables up here at the top, and my findings were that students were motivated to use blogs over the written journal. This first graph shows the percentage of students who on the survey answered that they really enjoy blogging. So if you notice, there's nobody that said that they strongly disagree or disagreed. I had a large majority of students say that they were neutral. A small percentage of students said agree, and then a larger percent of students said that they strongly agreed. Also, another item that I asked them on the survey, again using the Likert scale, was I am motivated to write because of the commenting aspect of blogs. And a lot of the literature reviews, or literature that I had read, said that students were motivated because of the peer feedback or the comments that they were receiving on their blogs. So I was curious if that was the case for my project. And as you notice, in this one, I did have responses from all 5 on the scale. I had a small percentage that strongly disagreed, a pretty small percentage that disagreed, a little bit larger percentage that felt neutral. The largest percentage agreed with the commenting aspect being motivating. So that was part of my findings, was that students were motivated to write on their blogs because of the commenting aspect. The observation notes that I also collected showed pretty true to be pretty true to this first graph, that they really enjoy blogging, because when I asked students to write a journal response, I got a lot of negative comments or even comments where they wanted the written journal back so that they could post it on their blogs because they wanted that feedback, as this graph shows. So I had a few students ask to have their journals back. I had a few students refuse to do their written journals without teacher support, which I don't have to support when they write on their blogs. As far as my data analysis and findings for my second question, using the checklist was how I analyzed this data. And I used the checklist, and when I was comparing the written journals to the blog post or posting online, I color coded my columns of checklists. And so then I could look across and see which students did it on both their written journal and their blog post, which students used it on only one or the other. And what I found was that conventions were being used both on the blog post and on the written journal if students had those skills. So if students already had punctuation writing skills and spelling writing skills, they used them on both. It wasn't that they just used them on their blog post or that they just used them on their written journal. Spelling was one that stuck out, was a little bit different because the spell check option on the computer helps students versus the written journal, but that wasn't a majority of the case. Majority of the students were proficient spellers and they did it on both. The only two pieces that were impacted were questioning. There were more questions asked to the audience on the blogs than on the written journal, because there's an audience for their blogs more than just the teacher on their written journal. There was also more reflective thinking on the blogs, and I attribute that to being able to look back because of the archive that blogs provide, being able to look back at their future blogs. I even had a student that I had jotted down a quote as an observation note that when he was writing his written journal, he said, "But I need to go back and look at what I wrote last week." So those two items were the only two that had an impact as far as conventions. For my data analysis for the graphs and the Likert scale, I used mean and standard deviation to present that and to analyze that data. My action plan moving forward. With sharing these results, my goal is to change the policy of blog privacy that is currently in my district at the elementary school. Currently, any student that has a blog that's under 6th grade, their blog is private to the teacher only, which defeats the purpose of blogs. And by my study, students are motivated by the commenting aspect and not commenting from the teacher, but commenting from other people outside of school. Another one of my objectives in sharing my data is to get more classrooms blogging, and I know that I'm going to need to use support for other teachers in order to do that, and be able to go into their classrooms and support them in setting them up, creating tutorials so that they can do that. In my classroom, I'm looking to use blogging for other subject areas and content areas. Obviously, it's motivating for students to write, and they like the commenting aspect of it. So instead of having students write in their notebooks, having them publish their writing, even though it didn't show much of a change in conventions, that motivation piece is what I'm building that off of. And then because the motivation or the conventions didn't prove to have an impact, or my data that I collected didn't show that there was an impact on conventions, whether students wrote in their written journal or on their blogs, I'm going to rephrase the research question, my first research question, about conventions. And I'm going to ask instead, what's the impact of a mentor text upon students' writing, and look at it from the view of having a mentor text provided to students showing those conventions, and see what impact that has on their writing in using like topic sentences and main idea and supporting details in their writing. So quite a few action planning aspects of my research project based upon the data that I collected and analyzed. Thank you very much.